starting the recording. I believe all our speakers are here. Yes, okay, great. All right, so everyone, I would please ask that if you're not speaking or if it's not your turn to speak, if you can please mute yourself. That would be very helpful for the people who are here today and also people who will be listening later. And if you're speaking, if it's possible to turn on your camera, if you can, that would also be helpful for people who are watching later. All right, so greetings everyone and welcome to the second session of LSA's talks on sexism, sexual harassment, and other issues in academia. So last week we had a really engaging session with the title of Complaint Work on the importance of naming the issues and testimony. Today's topic is sexism and sexual harassment, what can be done? Now, even though this is a very difficult moment and people are feeling quite vulnerable, and this is of course a very difficult topic, we're hoping that today's session can be more interactive, that we can have not just voices from our speakers, but also voices from the participants who are here. I'm going to introduce everyone very, very quickly. I'm not going to give the long bios as I did last week. If you're interested in people's bios, you can always see the first video for more information. But what I'm hoping today is that after I introduce everyone, I have 4 or 5 questions I'd like to offer to the panel and have their responses. After that, we'd love responses from people who are also here so that we can have a more interactive session. And before we open up, I will ask that when it's your turn to speak, well, we'll come to that later. Anyway, so greetings everybody. My name is Ademide Adelusi Adeluyi. I'm a historian at the University of California, Riverside. I'm the moderator again. I will go through our speakers' biographies very quickly in alphabetical order. We have Lola Akonde from the University of Lagos. She's an academic and a writer, and her most recent book, What It Takes, addresses this very issue that we're speaking about today. Next, Judith Byfield, who is originally from Jamaica, is a professor in the Department of History at Cornell University. Her publications include The Bluest Hands, a social and economic history of women indigo dyers in Western Nigeria from 1890 to 1940. And she has a current research project, Curry Goat and Gari, West Indian Women in 20th Century Lagosian Society, which focuses on English-speaking Caribbean women who migrated to Nigeria as the wives of Nigerian men. We also have Professor Bosede George, who is a professor of history at Barnard College and Columbia University in New York. She is the author of Making Modern Girls, a history of girlhood, labor, and social development in colonial Lagos. We also have with us today Dr. Tybert Lawenson, who is Associate Professor of Urban Planning and the Co-Director of the Center for Housing and Sustainable Development at the University of Lagos, Nigeria. Her research interests are in the broad areas of urban informality, pro-poor development, governance, and environmental justice. Among our speakers is also Professor Mojibaoluwa Olufunke Okome. She's an international political economist whose regional specialization is on the African continent. She has numerous publications on politics, including women's political and legislative participation in Nigeria, perspective from the 2007 elections, and other recent publications, and is also the founder of Bring Back Our Girls NYC. Finally, we have Charmaine Pereira of the African Feminist Forum. She's a feminist scholar activist who lives and works in Abuja in Nigeria. Her research and writing addresses themes such as feminist thought and practice, the gender and sexual politics of violence, women organizing, and the state. She has been active in the coalition. She's been an active force in the coalition pushing for the passage of the Violence Against Persons Prohibitions Act 2015. So I'd like to welcome our speakers and then participants. So this morning, not only do we still have questions from last week, but I have, as I mentioned, I have a few questions that I wanted would help us start the conversation before we open it up to everyone. So this is what I had in mind for today. So as scholars and activists, how should we think of the question of power and how should we manage power equitably? Secondly, what is our responsibility to each other? Third, what does justice look like for us as scholars, as people who are existing in these spaces? And is reform of behavior or even institutions, is this something that we consider to be possible? And of course, finally, for the Lagos Studies Association, what role should the LSA play in all of this? So I'm happy to hear from our speakers in order and maybe 5 minutes. Thank you. Yes, Professor Okome. You're muted.
Yeah. Can you please put the questions in the text, in the chat?
No problem. That's a good idea. Good. So everybody can also see them. There. Should we begin in order? Lola, would you like to respond to any of these? Lola, are you here? Okay. I can't see or hear you. Okay. Would any of our speakers?
Akande, I think she's talking to you.
I can't hear anything.
She's here.
She's here. Okay, maybe she's having technical issues. Judy, would you like to begin while we wait for Lola? Or maybe Abosade, you would like to begin.
Sure, no problem.
Thank you.
Okay, so I hope my comments will answer some of the questions you asked. And I started with the question of what can be done. And to that question, I added, what can be done for whom? Who are we on these panels for? Who are we engaged in all this complaint work for? To my mind, that person is a bright young woman who comes to university expecting to have her mind opened up, her world opened up, but instead she finds herself the target of a sexual predator, finds herself betrayed by others that she may turn to for help. And this is the person that we need to keep our focus on in order to be clear about what can be done. It's this question of who is it being done for? Everything we're doing here begins with the fact that the most vulnerable students were routinely being targeted for exploitation by sexual predators in the academy. Last week, we all heard the remarks of one of our most senior, most distinguished members of the academy report her own experience of assault as a young scholar conducting research in Nigeria, and how that experience very nearly led her to abandon her research, and for many decades certainly kept her away from Nigeria. She was only lucky to have a supportive network of friends, and she was lucky that they happened to be competent as supporters. And with that support, she persevered and came to realize her tremendous potential as a scholar, and decades later to even make her way back to Nigeria to participate in things like LSA. Make no mistake, without Professor Byfield, there would be no LSA. All three of the organizers of the first conference in New York were mentored in one way or another by Professor Byfield. I've been intellectually shaped by her work, some of the titles you've heard today, The Bluest Hands, Gender in the Diaspora, even the World War II book. During her tenure as president of ASA, I witnessed a tremendously thoughtful and ethical approach to leadership. And even though I've never been a student of hers, she's advised me and written many letters of recommendation for me. That kind of practical support at crucial stages propelled me to the position that I occupy today as a tenured member of the faculty at Barnard and Columbia. And this is the very position that enabled me to organize a Lagos Studies conference and then be part of putting together a Lagos Studies Association in Nigeria. In short, it matters that she did not abandon academia at that crucial time. And it matters that by the time I was coming into the academy as an eager young scholar, I could look up, look around, and see people like her and actually get support. The question is, for me, who are the others that did not get the crucial support? Who are the other Judith Byfields that have been lost to the poisoning hands of sexual predators in the academy? Where would the academy be if those bright minds had not been darkened by the solitary weight of the trauma they experienced? Professor Byfield, I want to say, displayed tremendous bravery and generosity to all of us by even sharing this personal history. But the truth is that each one of us here knows a story like this firsthand, whether we're survivors or witnesses, bystanders, or supporters in the story. We're all much closer to the accounts of exploitation than we would like to be. When I think of what can be done, I think of for whom. I think of that bright young student whose sense of self and whose brilliant mind was scattered instead of being strengthened through the experience of entering our universities. So what can be done? Many things can be done in a practical sense. Many people on this roundtable are already working in their institutions, in their research, in their advocacy groups. But what must be done throughout all of this is to maintain our focus always on that bright, eager, vulnerable young student. Thank you.
Thank you, Abosede, for your words and for also acknowledging Professor Byfield. Okay, would any of our speakers like to respond either to the general question? Yes, Professor Okoni.
I would like to respond. You know, so the first question, what does justice look like? No, I don't think that's the first question, but how do we manage power? What's power? How do we manage it equitably? There are many definitions of power, you know, but most of those definitions talk about power in a relational manner. You know, it's one actor interacting with other actors. And those who have power, they have influence in a system, they have voice, they have recognition, they usually have higher status, you know. And so I think the way I look at power is that justice and power should be interlinked if we want to have spaces where we are all honored, where we are all valued, where all of us are able to reach our full potential. You know, and I said last week that what women need is to be equal citizens of universities. And equality in the universities doesn't just mean creating some safe spaces. It means that all universities must be you know, spaces where everybody, male, female, however a person identifies, is able to walk around confidently, do the work they're there to do, have equal access to resources. And, you know, we don't have that yet because there is this, people talked about culture last week. I was thinking about it. There is a culture that has legitimated sexual harassment, even sexual assault, as something that is, oh, it just happens. You know, people don't either know that they're not supposed to do these things, or, you know, when they do it, it's a mistake. It is not a mistake. So there's a culture that has developed. That is to be separated from our indigenous culture and whatever it is contributing to what's going on. So when one sees this culture in operation, I think we are obliged to speak truth to power. And I also said last week, I spoke to colleagues at Nigerian universities, a fellowship that, you know, a host opportunity was withdrawn from me because I spoke to the people about their complicity in this system that was sexually harassing. Where do people go to when they have complaints? Some institutions have rules and regulations, laws, policies, but they are not enforced in any kind of decent way. Because when people speak up, they are penalized. And I said too, that's not something that we see just in Nigeria. What's our responsibility to each other? We have to support each other. We have to speak up. We have to stand with a person that is being targeted, and we have to see that they get justice. And that can be done in multiple ways, both inside the universities and outside. What does justice look like? You know, it's equity. You know, it's about everybody being treated equally, no matter what their power position is. And this is a tall order anywhere. So, we need to dig in and realize that we're in for a fight. Is reform possible? Yes, it is. If people know that these policies are serious and they'll be enforced, trust me, they are going to call themselves to order. What role should LSA play? Well, I thought the reason that we became female mentors was that we would stand in the gap. We would be there for our mentees. And some of the mentees have reached out and said that they experience sexual harassment and other exploitative behavior from the professors who are supervising them. So our job is to ensure that this kind of targeting stops, that we stand with them, as a body. But if that's not possible, I promise I'm standing with my mentees and I'll get them justice. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Okome. So in addition to my general questions, I do have some comments that were sent to the mentors that I will read after, but I just wanted to get the first round of comments as well. Thank you for this. Lola, is it possible, Lola Akonde, is it possible for you to respond now? I'm not sure, I could see you.
Yes, I guess I'm on now.
Yes, thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, even though it says you're muted.
With what I think we can do, I'm not going to share my slides because I'll just speak to what I've tried to do. Basically, I'm looking at two approaches, the individual approach and the institutional approach. On the institutional approach, I believe that the first thing universities need to do is to have the courage to approach independent investigators whenever there's a case of sexual abuse, or sexual assault, or harassment in the university, of giving this job of investigation to men with the offender.
I'm sorry, but we can't, you're really breaking up.
There are accusations that sometimes these panels are deliberately constituted. Yeah, I'm having this connectivity. I really don't know why today. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me? Yes. Can you? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear, at least I can hear you now.
Yes. Can you hear me? So I was saying that the first thing universities need to do is to give this job to independent investigators. They must also have the courage to invite the ICPC, that is Independent Corrupt Practices Commission. So we will not be like biased. That is at the institutional level. And they also need to periodically sensitize, train lecturers on the kind of relationship that should exist between faculty and female staff especially. On individual level, I would suggest that first, female students should be encouraged to trust female lecturers more. Women are carers, not trusting enough the female lecturers. The female students tend not to trust their female. Female students should be encouraged to know that it is okay to fail an exam. That when they fail an exam, it is okay. They should work harder to pass rather than to solicit upgrade from lecturers who will turn around and take advantage of their situation. I believe that institutions, universities need to reintroduce bursary poor. They can't even afford the phone. So female students oftentimes are taken advantage of because of this state of poverty. As a course advisor in Unilag, many students have come to me to complain that they were raped. And there's a recurring complaint. Many of them will say that they had not eaten even as late in the day as 3 p.m. And so when a lecturer decides to grab them, they do not have the physical power to resist or to push them away. So there's hunger, there's poverty, there are economic problems, and male lecturers tend to take advantage of this. In my days as an undergraduate student, I received bursary awards from the government. Government needs to look at this and reintroduce bursary awards. In my faculty, for instance, right now, under the leadership of our new Dean of Arts, Professor Olufunke Adeboye, she has a policy feeding indigent students during exam periods. I don't think it has happened before. And there are students that are actually very hungry. So if other faculties and other universities could replicate this, it's also possible to ask lecturers to contribute voluntarily into this kind of scheme where students are assisted so that male lecturers do not take advantage of their, of their hunger or whatever problems they are having. For female academics, early career academics, my advice, my suggestion is that they should not permit bullying. Professors bully. When I joined the University of Lagos newly, one of my ex-lecturers from UI came visiting. Actually, he was our external examiner. And he said something to me that I found a bit strange. He said, "Lola, you are a widow. You must remarry now." And I said, "Why now?" He said, "Because senior colleagues will take advantage of your being a widow." It didn't make sense to me until one morning when a professor walked into my office and said to me, "Lola, I feel like sucking your breast." And this was after I had published What It Takes. "I feel like sucking your breast." I didn't know what to say. So, quickly I recovered and I said, Prof, you know what? You deserve it. You deserve it. You have paid your dues. So what I want you to do now is tell me where you want me to come to, where we can have this, where you can suck my breast. And he said his office at 6 p.m. that day. And I told him, "Prof, we are not going to do it like that. Well, I'm a lecturer, I'm not a student. So I deserve an upgrade as well. What we are going to do is to get a hotel room and send me the details. But you are also going to commit this into writing. Prof, you send me a memo. Simply I want to suck your breast and I want you to commit." That was it. He was shocked. So thereafter, anytime we met on the corridor, he never had the courage again to come to my office to come and tell me that kind of thing. So I have attended three federal universities in Nigeria, and I see this problem everywhere. But I also know that if the individual could have, some kind of strong will and try to, stay strong, these lecturers are not as powerful sometimes as they threaten or they make people believe they are. Yes, they are powerful, especially with grading of scripts. And that's why I suggest that if it is possible, the universities in Nigeria should find a way to ensure that lecturers don't get to mark the exam scripts of the courses they have taught. I taught the National Open University for about 5 years before I came to Unilag. And one thing I noticed there was that we never graded scripts of students, that we taught. Although this is an open university where they have study centers across Nigeria, so they will carry the scripts of students in Lagos and take to Abuja and bring scripts of people in Enugu to Lagos and all that. So, but I believe that regular universities in Nigeria can look into how they can consider how this can be done, how they can table, where lecturers don't have this power over students' exam scripts, where there's anonymity, with regards to exam scripts, we'll be solving about 50% of this problem, and I believe it is possible. So let me stop there for me.
Thank you, Lala. I would also ask that anyone who's having network issues, maybe turning off your video is an option to improve the audio quality as well. We still have 3 speakers to hear from. Dr. Byfield, I don't know if you can respond now.
Yes, I can.
Thank you.
Again, thank you all for the opportunity to be here. I actually do want to acknowledge Professor Kande, whose presentation last week actually gave me the courage to share my own experience with you, because I did not join this talk actually planning to do that. And so she gave me the liquid courage that I needed. And Abosede, I am so moved by what you said, and I am glad that I'm still here to actually mentor, you know, the younger scholars coming along. And I just want to also acknowledge that, you know, mentoring is also about an opportunity to learn. And I've learned so much from working with scholars at different stages of their career paths. So some of the things that have been said already were also on my list of things to say. One is that we're going to need multiple responses to address this problem. It's not just in the academy. It is also very much a part of the broader societies in which we interact. It's a part of our professional associations. You know, there are those who are, who take advantage of opportunities when women or young men are alone. And so they may not even have any direct power, you know, position of power over them. Sometimes these are crimes of opportunity. However, I do want to say that, you know, in the space where we are, or the spaces where we are, those are the spaces that I think we can have tremendous influence. So our classrooms, in terms of the curriculum, the things we teach, the way we talk about certain subjects, are we ourselves comfortable enough in talking about sexual harassment, sexual assault, about sexuality as a part of our lectures? They should be able, we should get to the point where we too, if we are able to talk about these things, part of what we convey to students is that they can come and talk about these things, that they can talk about these issues among themselves as well in their student organizations. It's also important that this is a conversation that includes men and women, where there are asymmetrical relations of power between men and women, and patriarchy does involve privileges to men, but not all men experience the same privileges. Just one of the points from what Professor Kande just said now too, is that class matters. There are people who are able to take advantage of the fact that they have resources that other people can only aspire to, and that can be what's used to sort of grease the sexual abuse and predatory relations that are at play in all of these different spaces. So even when we talk about power, about wealth, that whether we're discussing women's history or the state, that those two things have to be part of that conversation as well. The work that we do in the academy should also be part of broader conversations. It can't remain only in the academy, and certainly that is part of the problem with this law that was recently passed, that it's only specific to tertiary institutions. But we all know that they happen in banks, they happen in hotels. There's just really no space where predators don't exist and don't take advantage of the resources that they have. And so we have to, in very self-conscious ways, create forums where activists as well as scholars come together and share ideas for how we address these issues, for the different types of conversations that should be happening in different spaces. And the conversations have to be appropriate as well for different age levels. I think ultimately that we have a responsibility to each other to be respectful, to be supportive. If people come to us and they're in trouble, certainly to at least be able to listen and hear them and validate the experience that they have gone through. But we also individually don't have all the answers. And you know, it's great if professors can, you know, assist individual students who are experiencing hunger. But professors too have struggles. I mean, I lived with an academic family who sometimes didn't get their salary for months on end. And so they too were trying to figure out ways of managing and coping. So just because someone has a particular job, it doesn't mean that they too, by definition, have resources that can extend, to the networks of people around them. We have to be part of larger political movements. We cannot be, siloed in the fact that we are in the academy. This has to be a part of social movements that talk about inequalities and the multiple ways in which it manifests and actually supports predatory behavior. At UI's campus, we have to talk about all those gentlemen who show up at the women's dorms on a weekend. And you drive around and you see all those very expensive cars. Those are predators. And we have to be able to talk about them, identify what they're doing, and giving our students not just the economic resources, but the intellectual resources, the confidence to say, no, I don't have to go to dinner with you. Our relationships should not be transactional. And part of what inequality does, in whether we're talking about Jamaica, whether we're talking about Haiti, whether we're talking about the US, one of the things that inequality does is that it breeds transactional relationships in everything. So I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. We still have two of our speakers to hear from, I guess in order. Taibat, are you able to respond now?
Yes, I am, but I would like to switch off the video because the network has been really terrible in Lagos today.
Of course, thank you. We understand. We just, as long as we can hear you, we can always see you.
Okay, good. So thank you, everybody. Good afternoon. I would like to speak specifically to two questions. The first is, what is our responsibility to each other? And then what does justice look like? I'll start with what does justice look like? And for me, with regards to institutions, the system should be clear, open, unambiguous, and fair. Currently, a lot of the dynamics favor the person who has power, the lecturer or the perpetrator of the injustice. And the policy should be clear and enforceable. The University of Lagos sexual harassment policy, for example, has clear definitions of what is an offense, what is a contravention, and the consequences of such. The reporting line also must protect the victim's identity, because oftentimes the fear of stigmatization or bullying or harassment, of being a whistleblower of sorts, prevents people from reporting. And sometimes it is not the victim who wants to report, it is somebody who is a witness to the crime, who can report. So the reporting line should protect the identity, and then provide the opportunity for care, for counseling, for, the victims. And it must be localized. Having a central system of justice doesn't work, because before the wheels of justice, turn, a lot of harm will have been done, and then the fear of repercussion will have been removed. And I will say that it must be linked to the public criminal justice system, so that if a disciplinary committee on campus indicts somebody, that person must be handed over to the authorities. It's not enough to have, this internal system of correction. If a crime has been committed, no matter the scale, it should be brought out in the open, and whoever is the perpetrator must, be made to face justice. For the perpetrators, it must be swift. A lot of our committee work, drags slow, and that is where the issue of weariness comes in. If a committee is sitting for 6, 8, 10 months over an issue that is very clear, then, justice may be done eventually, but it will not be seen to be done. For behavior reform, I really don't have anything to say about that, because you must really be a monster to, to kind of prey on whoever, women or men. And then for survivors, I think the important thing is that justice must be seen to be done, and there must be pathways to healing. With regard to our responsibility to each other, I want to talk about women gatekeepers. Women traditionally, instinctively, we take on the responsibility to support other women in the academy and our students. But there are also other women who bow to the patriarchal culture of condescension. And so, they align with that culture of, making, trivializing the issues, or removing the bite. And oftentimes it's women who are at the higher levels who hold power. I think we really need to speak, and let women understand that the higher you go, you have a greater responsibility to protect those behind you. And with regards to that, there is also need for multiple channels of reporting and care. Oftentimes when these students have these kinds of issues, they come, to lecturers, to their female lecturers, to their female maybe graduate assistants, or people, that are close to them. And if you don't have a pathway, or if you don't have some measure of influence in the system, it dies there. At the most, you counsel the person, or you help the person to go through that process, but it doesn't go up to see that justice is done. And more importantly, I think the mentoring and creating opportunities for women to step into is very important, where you can create a pathway for a woman and help her to, rise and thrive. I think it's important, so that at the end of the day, there are more women where these decisions are being taken. I said last week that the academy is a boys' club, and oftentimes if they're going to compose a committee, there are more men to be selected. If they're going to pick people, there are more men to be selected. So we need to encourage women and help them to rise, so that when these decisions are being taken, there are more women at the table who can speak. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Lawrenson. And our final panelist is Charmaine Pereira. Charmaine, are you able to respond?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. I think the question that you raised of power at the very beginning is really important. But I also think it's important to recognize that there are multiple hierarchies of power in any educational institution. We're focusing on universities here. And whilst the male lecturer, female student relationship is an archetypal one of imbalances of power, we should not forget that male students exercise power in relation to their female peers. And amongst faculty, junior faculty, women who are junior faculty experience similar power relations relative to those higher up the hierarchy. So we're dealing with very complex relationships of power in any single institution, and quite diverse populations, at least in public universities. So at the level of, you know, how we exercise power, not all of us are in universities, but I think anyone who is engaged with trying to produce knowledge has a relationship of power to what kind of knowledge is produced and for whom. And this has been raised by, you know, other speakers. But I think that reaching female students with in ways that can give them a greater angle on feminist theory, feminist understandings of gender, sexuality, power, institutions, and change, that could help, could make a difference in terms of not only enlarging their own possibilities of understanding what's happening around them, but being able to see in what ways they can, through interaction with others, engage or act in ways to try and change the institution. I think that the relationship between the institution and the broader world, the world outside, has to be, you know, recognized as always present. It's never as if even if one is dealing with institutional policies, how these may be developed, formulated in the first place, how they understand all of these issues. When it comes to implementation, they are never partitioned from the outside world. And this is why, you know, recognizing how those power relations operate both within and across institutional boundaries has its correlate in what, you know, a number of speakers have referred to already, the need for organizing at different levels within and outside and across the universities. And when I just mentioned the necessity of understanding gender, sexuality, power better, more clearly, I'm also referring to the importance of heteronormativity within that. You know, there's a tendency for people to assume that as soon as you bring that word up, given the existence of the Same-Sex Marriages Prohibition Act, that it means, you know, you can't even talk about those issues outside of academies, but that is not the case. And I think scholars, students, anyone who's interested in the issues really needs to see how this plays such an important role in norms of masculinity and femininity within the institution, and how those are in so many ways normalize different kinds of violence. We've been hearing about that today, but also in the previous session. And how we cannot underestimate the monumental tasks that lies ahead of us, but that is no reason for not taking it on. It just means we have to be better organized, and organized at different levels, at the intellectual, the social, political, and even economic levels, you know, to do this kind of work. Yeah, there is more that can be said. I think that people can often feel that institutional approaches, whether it's policy or laws, are important. I think that they are necessary, but they're not sufficient. And none of these institutions, none of these bureaucratic measures, whether it's policy or laws, operate in a vacuum. So there's always, you know, greater complexity when you start to think of, okay, even if a policy looks good on paper, what does the significance of how the problem is understood? Is it seen as an individualized problem of, you know, survivor and perpetrator? Or is there a recognition that the norms of the institution, the institutional cultures in themselves create conditions for violation? Until we reach that point, until we reach the point of recognizing that taking on not only stigma, the stigma which makes it so difficult for survivors to speak out, but the victimization that follows subsequently and has to do with the threat and fear that powerful men feel when faced with the possibility of changing their conditions of privilege, you know, that's the size of the task ahead of us. And I'll end there.
Thank you so much, Sharman, for your comments. Okay, so our final speaker unfortunately could not join us today because of a commitment on campus that has to do with her work as the university librarian. So Dr. Yasmine Zaid couldn't join us today. Now that all our panelists have spoken, it's time for us to hear from our participants as well. So I guess a couple of things. I wanted to raise a few points that have come up between our sessions. First is a few students and graduates raised points around the utility of safe spaces, right? What do these spaces look like? How are they actually used? And how are they maintained in that sense? Another important comment that we received was around the issue of reporting. To quote, the student said, "I'm tired of reporting because this isn't the first time I've experienced such things, and I've reported before. What made this experience different from others was because I didn't fight this, I just gave in. I won't report this, I just want to heal and move on with my degree. I'm looking forward to volunteering with organizations fighting gender violence, and I'm sure helping out people with experiences similar to mine would help me in my journey to complete healing." So we have received all kinds of very difficult and really painful responses to the kinds of conversations that we're having. And I'd like to encourage everyone who's here who would like to say something to please find a way to get my attention, not by speaking first, but by either raising the little blue hand. I can't see everybody's window. So at this point, we're all familiar with Zoom. If you have something to say, please raise the little blue hand or write it in the chat and say, "Ademide, I have a question/comment," and I will call on you. I'm keeping a list going. So if you do have a comment or have something to say or a question to ask the general audience, just get my attention in one of these ways and unmute yourself, and please tell us who you are and see if you can keep your response to 90 seconds, because likely it will provoke other responses. And we'd like to hear from as many people as possible. So if you have a comment or question, please raise your hand or write it in that you'd like to speak in the chat, and we'll open it up. Okay, I see a couple. Okay. Once I have a few, then I will start. Then we will start. Okay, we'll begin and get people warmed up. Carly, you had a comment you wanted to make, so please introduce yourself and tell us your comment.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I didn't realize I was going to speak, so I don't have something beautiful prepared. But I just want to say that to thank everyone. The presentations have been so moving and haunting and have stayed with me all week. What I'd like to do is to offer an issue of my journal, the Journal of African Cultural Studies, which is close to Lagos Studies in many ways, and we've done many panels on campus forums already. We can talk about that in more detail, but I wonder if one would also want to link, as many people here have said, to the world outside campus, but also to conversations elsewhere on the continent beyond Nigeria. There's scholars in Kenya like Dina Legaga, Caroline Mosei, in Ghana, we know the names. So, you know, to de-particularize, if there's maybe value in that. The Women's Mentoring Network of Lagos Studies is the most extraordinary group of women. I mean, there is not another group of women like that anywhere in the world, I think. Multi-located, powerful, committed to LSA, committed to early career scholars. So to mobilize from within that group, I think, for a special issue of the journal. LSA supports and amplifies the voices of early career scholars and in particular of women. So it seems to me that Lagos Studies and the Women's Mentoring Network are a kind of perfect combination, perfect partners for really starting a bigger conversation through a special issue of a journal.
Thank you so much, Carly. And we appreciate you being here as well. Okay, next we have Bookie Williams, EVA. Don't forget to introduce yourself.
Okay. Thank you for such a great panel. Yes, thanks for such a great panel. My name is Bookie Williams. I work at Education as a Vaccine. And currently we're actually working on a project in which Charmaine is serving as an advisor on how to advocate for the safety and bodily integrity of adults and girls and young women in tertiary institutions. And we are going to be collecting stories. Oh no, can you hear me now? Hello?
I can
My
hear
network
you now.
has been bad. Maybe I'll just put it in the chat.
I can hear you now. Oh, I can hear you, but there's a bit of a delay, I think. So continue, please.
Okay, thank you. So as I was saying, my name is Bookie Williams. I'm the Executive Director of Education as a Vaccine. We are a nonprofit organization that works with adolescents and young people, and we're doing a project in which Charmaine is advising us on advocating for the safety and bodily integrity of adolescent girls and young women. And we're working with Premium Times to be able to do various stories that we hope would really paint the picture of what's going on in institutions beyond just saying there are a few bad eggs. And so I think, just listening to the conversation and what Lagos Studies is doing, I think they can play a very critical role. Because a lot of civil society organizations are doing this work. And I think a partnership between the Lagos Studies Association and some of these CSOs like ours actually would be really useful, either in helping us in collecting the right kind of stories. So can we reach out and let the reporters who are working with us interview some of you and talk to you so that the ideas that comes from that can be useful. We're hoping that before the project ends at the end of the year that we could connect with student groups who are thinking about starting advocacy clubs or accountability clubs or consent clubs. If we could connect them with some of the scholars in this group who could support them, who could mentor them, who could push them in the right direction, I think that would be very useful as well, because I really do think that we all at this point realize what a big issue this is, and it's not going away. And ASU stands around the standing of the issues. Who would be willing to really work with students and CSOs to make sure that we actually start doing something around changing, around creating change on this particular issue? So that's what I just wanted to add.
Thank you so much, despite our network challenges today. Okay, very good. Next, we have Professor Oyewumi. Are you still here? Yes, but I can't hear you or see you.
Hello.
Okay, excellent.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. And I cannot thank everybody enough, especially the panelists. And I'm learning so much, especially from people on the ground in Nigeria. And that's such invaluable information. One of the things I want to emphasize here, I don't think we can talk enough about this idea of culture and the idea that culture is enabling it. It seems to me that many of us are not very clear either about the fact that sexual predation is just bad and unacceptable. And I see this in terms of some of the language that we use. Some women are pretty, some students are loaded, so professors are this and that. And so what it brings to my mind is that we have to understand that the difference between our societies, our countries in Africa, and let's say the US, is not some tradition of the other. Is that they believe, here in the US, feminists and other organizers believe that their societies are perfectible, meaning that society can be improved. But what I am hearing, I'm not necessarily saying just here, from us, when you talk about these issues and people introduce the idea of tradition, is the idea that the society cannot change, especially given the fact that our societies have changed so much. That's why Africans were not born with Islam or Christianity, and now they carry it on their heads. So we have to start from the premise that our society is changeable, changing, and the question is, how do we change it? And in what direction do we want to go? Believe that our societies are perfectible. This morning here in the US, I feel that there are a lot of people who are feeling motherless because of the death of Justice Ginsburg. And I was just listening to reflections on her life. I mean, when she got her job at Rutgers, she had to hide her pregnancy, all those kinds of things. I bring up this illustration again to underscore the fact that the US is not the way it is because of some inherent tradition. It's because people are fighting and they keep fighting it. And Professor Okome has pointed out that, yes, in Nigeria, there's a social movement. We must have social movements that keep pushing forward. And I agree with Charmaine Pereira that institutional responses are good, necessary, but we have to talk about the broader culture of impunity in the society and how to change it. I am also trying to think through some of the experiences in the US that I have observed. I'm asking questions about how do we institute civic education so that people will understand these things? Because some of the perpetrators and some of the people that this is happening to and the society at large, people are very wobbly about ethics, about morality, about these issues. Is there a place for civic education? Do we have a role to play in that? I'm also thinking of general education courses, and I have no clue as to how possible that is in Nigeria, but I am putting it on the table because in the United States, one of the things that puzzled people shortly after marriage equality and there was more receptivity to LGBTQ issues. One of the things that seemed to be crucial is the fact that in the last 2 decades, and I want to say I have been a part of it, is that in our universities, we taught courses on gender, on sexuality, on what is acceptable, what is not. And it was part of the general education system. I'm wondering, is that possible in institutions in Nigeria? Is there a role for us to play there? And one final thing I want to say. I remember years ago, a professor here in the US made a comment that when you're going to interview for a job on a campus, that if the campus has a women's studies program and a women's center, it's likely to be a better place to work than other places. When I entered the academy in the US, they had these things called women's centers. Certain kinds of spaces. I actually see a women's center as a space on campus that could also be the possibility, that has the possibility of introducing intellectual ideas and dealing with students. I'm just putting all those things on the table, especially for people who are on the ground. Is there room for this kind of thing? And how can we interact with it? Thank you.
Thank you, Prof, and for everyone who has spoken already. So folks, I'd like to collect another round of comments or questions. If you have a comment or question, please just say I have a question in the chat or raise your hand. I have 1 or 2 already, so we'll wait for a few more. If you don't want to speak publicly or your network is not so great, you can type your question to me privately and I can raise it for you, or you can just raise your hand. Okay, thank you. I see you, Judy. Okay, so this series of questions is for the panelists, and they come from Ololade Fani. Do you suppose that the institutional emphasis on gender equality as opposed to feminism enables an abstract fear of the ideology? 1. And secondly, would you say that gender equality campaigns as they play out in most institutions fail to really unpack power dynamics as it informs systematic silencing and sexual violence against women? This is for our panelists first. And I'll put them in the general chat.
I'll respond to that. I think that I agree with the observation that the way the institutions frame the question, frame the problem as a gender equality problem, as a problem perhaps of balancing numbers, as opposed to the way it might be framed from a feminist, through a feminist analysis as a problem of power that can play out in a gender dynamic between male and female, but power that is always fundamentally about the exploitation of the weaker by the stronger and can be analogized in many ways. I think that perspective would be much more empowering to those who confront those dynamics. When you encounter it, you don't necessarily have to see it only, when you encounter it, you can recognize it as a symptom of a larger power structure that has trickled down to your individual case. And that, as I said last time, and as Charmaine has pointed out, those who are capable of exploiting power for either their sexual gratification or what in those ways are also capable of exploiting people for labor, for exploiting people for money, exploiting people for various other things. It's all symptoms of the same kind of power dynamic. And I think that a feminist critique or feminist analysis would make that readily available. If the institution is not focusing on feminist analyses of power and is instead focusing on a kind of liberal idea of gender equality or gender balance, and I understand that the the concept of gender means different things in different places, right? So it might be much more radical to talk about gender in Nigeria than it is somewhere like in, I don't know, South Africa or something, I don't know, wherever. But I think that that does play a role. The language that people are asked to understand the problem through plays a role in constraining or opening up the possibilities of how they can address the problem, how they can imagine addressing the problem.
I just wanted to really, strongly support what Abosede and Charmaine said earlier too about a feminist lens that is going to think about these issues through that lens of power, because then it gives us, these analytical tools that allow us to explore multiple spaces. So whether it's the universities, whether it's the marketplace, the banks, all of these different institutions, and get an appreciation for the different ways in which asymmetrical power relations create specific cultures within all of these spaces. I just also want to pick up something that Ronke brought up about women's centers and all the particularly when I was at Dartmouth College, the Women's Center there was a very, very important institution or place on the campus, partly given that campus's earlier history of being an all-male institution until 1972. And as I mentioned last week too, that a number of the men who were there at the time the institution went co-ed were very angry and hostile to the presence of women on the campus. But on one hand, sort of the name in here mattered. It was called the Women's Center, but it actually served more than women. The center was the space where LGBTQ students could also come and meet and have their own conversations about how they were, dealing with the hostilities that they experienced on the campus as well too. The other thing is that it was not just for students, and it wasn't just for faculty. It was also for administrators, for staff. These were the people who were in housekeeping, the people who worked in the dining hall. So women from any space on the campus could come. But we constantly wrestled with the idea of calling it the Women's Center because some people read that as being exclusive to women. But we can name it. We never did actually rename it while I was still there. But I think we do really have to pay attention to when we create these spaces that allow us to talk about gender, patriarchy, and this, use feminist analyses or not, that they are inclusive spaces. And so, yes, we would be open and, should be equally welcoming of women who don't want to be identified as feminists, whose, political orientation may be across a spectrum, but who certainly have needs for some of the practical things that can happen in those spaces. So we have to think about how we present them and position them so that we don't convey that it's only women. These should also be spaces where young men are able to come to meet, to think through a different type of masculinity that doesn't support the sorts of, the sort of more toxic masculinity that exists around us. But it's a wonderful idea. But you also have to come up with models that make sense in our very specific contexts and locations.
Thank you, Judy. So Professor Okome, I see your hand. We also have another question coming. I wonder if anyone else on the panel wants to respond to those two questions from before we move to the next.
Yes, more of a comment. I think that as we build institutions, we should also be aware that institutions are not perfect, that we have to keep up the struggle to make these institutions live up to their to the values that they espouse, you know, because I have worked most for 20 years at Brooklyn College. I'll again draw on my experience there. Well, I was at Columbia University for 14 years too. So gender inequality does not live in Nigeria. It is not a Nigerian. It is an all over the world thing. And when people have power, a lot of times impunity is kind of built into the system, because the system is not going to put the people who are highest on the echelons of power on the spot the way it puts people who are lower in the totem pole and ask them to account for their actions. So what I'm saying is that as we kind of struggle to have women's centers and general ed courses and build these institutionalized ways in which people can bring complaints, there must also be action. And that action must be consistent, that supports the people who bring these charges, that also insists that the institutions do their job. Because many institutions would rather sweep things under the rug. They don't want to look bad. They don't want, the wahala of really truly investigating these things. They go through the motions and they solve no problems, So if we say that we really want change to happen, all the things that have been suggested are excellent, but there is a need for consistent social action that keeps institutions honest. And I do believe that the biggest onus is on these universities. If they want to be educating all of us, they must be made to make the whole space of the university safe. They're not going to do it, whether it's here in the US or in Nigeria. And I know there's a resource deficit in Nigeria that makes things more difficult, but it is not impossible to have change anywhere. And, so this is beyond talk. It's also about the fact that sometimes if in the past a person has, been quiet when injustice is being done in terms of targeting people, assaulting people, exploiting people sexually, or, kind of extorting food for sex and grades and all that kind of stuff, one needs to then say, where do I stand today? And then we build communities that support one another. So that when people come forward, there are people standing with them. When they need to go and confront the university, and I kept bringing up Abiola Akiyode Afolabi because she has been there for victims. She has gone to hearings. She has insisted upon hearings being held by universities that didn't want to have them. And many of the organizations in the Womanifesto coalition have also stood there. They've rescued people from rape instances, from domestic situations where there's gender-based and intimate partner violence. So there are things going on in Nigeria too that they're worth supporting. Many of these organizations are they're not very wealthy. They need people to join and sometimes we contributed money to help people because people were out on the street, there was nowhere to go and stuff like that. So if we say we mean to do something, there are things to do. You have to put your money where your mouth is, and then you have to be ready to work hard. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Okay, so if no more panelists want to respond, we have questions from our participants, and I would like to move there now. No? Okay, very good. So first we have Omomi Dada, who has a question or comment.
Hello, everyone. My name is Wumi. I'm a very young scholar here in Canada, though I'm also an activist in Nigeria. And I was thinking, first, very great conversations. It's really nice to be part of this. But I was thinking that it seems like we're sort of centering the survivors or victims. And so that made me think of the perpetrators and what we could do through the institution. And I thought, and I know, I don't know about the recruitment process or the orientation process that goes on in universities. So maybe Lola Conde can maybe educate us on that, or people within the academia in Nigeria. But from what I've seen here in Canada, when new professors are recruited, they have to go through an orientation process, even if those processes sort of bore them, but they go through an orientation process, and even for new students. But talking about the lecturers or the professors, is it possible for us to have strong change agents amongst the Lagos State, this group that can actually convince, the university system to have an orientation process that includes topics about this? Because what I'm thinking is that people come into the system sort of expecting that they have the freedom to girls' bodies, because they're coming from a society that grants them that freedom. They're coming from a society that accepts, all the statements that they say, or, what we've seen with the Tejo Show Market March, where women's bodies can be touched anyhow. And maybe if we start to, use that process of the orientation or the recruitment process, or even the promotion process in the universities, maybe that will start to curb this menace. And I want to also agree to that point of having women's studies or women's centers in universities. I do think that this would be a very loud statement by each institution, a statement of no tolerance to issues of sexual harassment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wumi, for your response and question. Would anybody like to respond to her point?
Yes, let me respond to that. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right.
Can you turn off your video, maybe, if it might improve your connection?
What do you want me to do?
Turn off your video.
I should turn it off.
If you can.
Okay, I have done so. So can you hear me now?
Yes.
I don't know why I'm having this connectivity problem today. So yeah, I want to respond to that first by saying that I am very aware that the University of Lagos is very sincere about these processes and procedures for, protecting female students, and in fact, all students. Now, for instance, when I came into Unilag, I was trained. They have a program where they train you as you are coming in. And it doesn't matter whether they're employing you as a professor. They give you an orientation program, that is very, very detailed. They do the same for students. The problem, in my view, is that individuals are not sincere, even when they take part in these programs and, and they follow these processes. They just do so for, let me use the Nigerian phrase, to fulfill all righteousness. So that's why I am glad that Wumi has mentioned the promotion process. Now, one thing about what is affecting, one thing that I believe is affecting this problem seriously is the process of promotion, where it is all about academic papers, where there is nothing about the character. I believe that if institutions can bring character assessment to the promotion process, For instance, there's a process where students are asked to comment on the quality of teaching of their teachers at the end of the semester or at the end of the session. If they could say that these students should also comment on the habit of the lecturers. Now, these lecturers who are behaving this way, they do so without letting the university management know. And when they do so and they are caught, they try to circumvent the processes and the procedures. So the university management itself is so committed, but the individual lecturers in this school are the ones who are perpetrating this evil, if you permit me to use that language. So if universities can, bring this idea of, okay, it is not, I'm not interested only about how many papers you have written before you can promote, because you have promoted, what is your character? If they can do that, it will check a lot of lecturers, because the lecturers, they carry on this appearance of sincerity, of integrity, but they are not, they don't have integrity at all. And unfortunately, most of this is not known to the management of the university. The ones that become open, the university does not, permit it at all. But how many of them, are actually caught? And how many students have the courage to report? Now, there was a particular instance of where a student came to me to say she had just been raped by a lecturer. And she told me that the lecturer raped her in the afternoon, that even as he was doing it, that people were knocking on his door. And I was so concerned, I wanted to take up this matter. So I told the student to make use of her phone, to tell the lecturer that, after about 2 weeks, she should send a text message to the lecturer that she didn't see her period. And we should wait for the response from the lecturer. She did, and the lecturer responded, saying that I did not ejaculate into you. So I felt we were building evidence. So I encourage the students to, go ahead and try more, by sending text messages, so that we can be compiling this as evidence. But I was shocked by the time I thought I had enough, and I went to meet the head of department. First he said, do you know the implication of what you are trying to get yourself into? They are going to set up panels and this and that, and then you discover that you don't have time again to do your work. You will be attending panels, you'll be moving from panel to panel, and people will see you as a troublemaker, and I said I was prepared. Unfortunately, the student, when it was time, the student told me she was no longer ready. She didn't want to go ahead with it, because the student had also been convinced not to go ahead with it. So it is not the problem of the university management. They do orientation, they do sensitization, they try to protect students, but these lecturers are doing these things without letting the university management know. There's nobody who does it in Unilag, for instance, that can escape it. But that is if it comes to the knowledge of the management. But how does it come to the knowledge of the management? They have so many ways. So in my view, the individual has a lot to do. That's why I say that the individual has a lot to do. First, there must be courage. Even the female students of the early female career academics must be courageous to, they must be bold, they must be ready to really ensure that to make up their minds that they want to expose these people. Like the professor I told to send me a memo. If he had done so, I would have used it. But he couldn't do it. And because he couldn't do it, he couldn't pursue it. So students need to have courage, they need to speak up, and individuals need to just be courageous, so as to also be able to help the university management, my view.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Akonde. So we have a number of responses. Charmaine, I see you. I just wanted to highlight somebody who hadn't spoken yet, but I definitely see your hand is up. Thank you. We have Professor Adenike Grange, who had a comment almost 15 minutes ago. I wonder if you still want to speak, if you're still here.
Hello.
Yes.
Oh, yes. Yes, I'm Professor Adenike Grange, Professor of Pediatrics, but I want first of all to congratulate all of you I've learned a lot. Even though I'm professor of pediatrics, there's quite a lot to be learned concerning gender, culture, and particularly the values in our culture today. Now, I'm speaking today as a grandmother, not as a professor. I have grandchildren in their teenage years, and I believe that this is the time really to capture them and to get them to be involved, to engage in discussions such as this. How can this happen? You know, in our days, we used to have debates in schools on other issues, of course. We never went into these very complex subjects, but these subjects are very important now for them. There is so much competition out there with other subjects that are taking them away from the value system and value judgments. So how can we set this up? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Grange. So unless someone wants to respond, Charmaine, are you able to respond or ask a different question?
Well, actually, I was going to respond to some other issues that people had raised so far. I think it's too easy to expect survivors to speak out. We cannot underestimate the challenges of doing that. But even when they do, what are the chances of anything actually being done? I've had students from Uni Abuja tell me that they have complained about issues of assault, rape in some instances, and even there was even a case of someone who videotaped her, sorry, not videotaped, but used her phone, to take a video. And there was some initial, furore about that, but ultimately the case died down and nothing was done. And in other instances, students have been, young women have been told, do you want to graduate? I mean, that is so shocking and horrifying. It's like, okay, you were raped, and so what? You know the situation. So if you want to graduate, you keep quiet and you get on with it. So we really have to recognize that across the country, the situation in different universities varies considerably. It's only a few that have actually, put in effort to come up with policies. But even then, that doesn't mean that implementation will actually take place. All of these processes, formulation of policies, development, writing, concluding, and implementation are political processes. And we have to recognize that they take place in the context of very hostile, misogynist institutions for, for most of the spaces within those universities. And the only times when we've had institutional recognition that there is a problem has been when it seems like Nigeria is being shamed on the international front. And that was what the sexual harassment bill, the reaction to getting it passed at the level of the Senate, that's what preceded that situation. So I'm thinking, in addition to the scholarly, the intellectual, the cultural and social dimensions of the kind of change that needs to take place, we also need to recognize the political dimensions. What's the political context within which we are located at this moment that has brought so many people together? It means that work has been going on for a long time, and there are different groups working within and outside universities, not only on issues of the institutional kind of change that needs to happen, but you know, at the level of the gender and sexual politics, trying to think through some of that. But if we want to try and bring change about at a more systemic level, then I think we have to target systemic structures like the NUC, the Nigerian Universities Commission. And you know, there's been a suggestion, Buki made a suggestion on the chat, but this has also been discussed at different levels for some time. The NUC should be pressured to make the safety of students and serious recognition of sexual harassment and sexual violence as problems on campuses, criteria for accreditation. How this is actually going to happen would be, you know, a whole process in itself of thinking through what would need to be in place. But there are demands for accountability from powerful institutions that should be made. It shouldn't always be a question of expecting survivors to speak out. So, and I think this is, I mean, I feel that this is important. Wumi raised the question of looking at more institutional processes like recruitment, promotion, admission of students and so on, and orientation as part of that. And all of these things are important. They should be seen as a part of a holistic approach to trying to not only address the specific question of sexual harassment and sexual violence on campus, but how to change the institutions in a way and in a way that is more equitable on the grounds of gender, but across so many of the other divisions in society. And that's not going to happen if it's just located within the organization. You know, it has to happen at a broader social and cultural level too. And can I just say one thing very quickly about women's studies, gender studies, and so on. The African Gender Institute at the University of Cape Town did a survey some time ago, and I think there's an effort to try and update that by different actors of the different centers and institutions that were offering such courses across the continent. And of course, the content varies considerably. Not all of these courses are feminist. And there are very few courses that actually declare themselves as feminist. But I'm not sure of any that do actually. But I mean, what's important is to get the content in. So we shouldn't just assume that because they're called women's studies or gender studies, that they will necessarily throw more light on the complexity, the power relations, and dynamics of these processes and situations.
Thank you so much, Charmaine. So we are, surprisingly enough, we are winding down already. We have about 20 more minutes, but I wanted to make sure to highlight some of the questions I've got, especially from people whose networks were not working, are not doing so well right now. The first thing I want to say is to draw everyone's attention to the chat. There's a very vibrant conversation happening on the sidebar. So if you haven't been looking, do take a look. And we will save this and find a way to distribute this to everyone as we continue to think about steps for the future. One question I received from Linda Mustafa, who says that, what can we do about aspects of sexual abuse or things that accompany it that are not visible, things that are dangerous, things that people think are funny, or things that are subtle that can be employed to put women down? How can we address these issues that may not rise to these levels of these tribunals, but nevertheless affect female scholars, especially junior ones? And I think this is also linked to a comment that Professor Laiwala made in the comments as well. I wonder if anybody wants to respond to this before we move to a couple of the raised hands. I mean, when I say everyone, I mean participants or...
Okay, so I want to speak a bit to that. You know, last week, I keep referring to my last week thing. I said that there are words, you know, so sexual harassment involves the use of words and also action. Some of the things are subliminal. And since everybody is talking about experience, when I was in the University of Ibadan in 1977, my psychology professor said to me that my non-verbal language was hostile. And in the discussion that we had, it was like he was interested in me. He said I wasn't greeting him. I wasn't, you know, friendly. Anyway, I ended up, after confronting him and asking him, I don't understand what this is about. It turned out he was interested in having, you know, booty calls. And I said, no, I'm not interested. And, you know, I kind of was very overtly rude to him. So he proceeded, people told me, my classmates, that he was going to fail me. He ended up, after other professors appealed to him, he ended up giving me the marginal pass mark, and it affected my GPA. It's true, you should be bold and confront, you know, but if you're struggling, if let's say I was food insecure, if I needed money, if my parents were not going to be supportive of me challenging somebody, I would not be so vocal, you know, because I was punished, even though people appealed to this guy. And I could not really prove what he said to me because it was said in his office, in private space, you know. And then there's also this thing about people who have power, even today, even in the college that I teach in, and the universities that I attended in the United States. People who have power are never called to order the way people who don't have power are. So they get away with a whole lot. Even when you have laws and policies and bodies like the Title IX office to check things out, you know, so we should be aware of this. And so what we have to do is not just encouraging victims to speak out. When the victims are going to be victimized, even more, because you will be failed. You might be driven out of the profession. You might not have anybody recommending you for things. You might be vilified. You know, people are going to also say you are lying because you do not have concrete evidence when it's words and, you know, subliminal messages that are being passed. If we say we want to make the situation safe, I think the onus is on the people who say they want things to change, not just on the person. And then much of the work we have to do is on the institutions, that it's their job to make these spaces safe. And this is what produced many of these women's centers that we're talking about. It's what produced women's studies as a discipline itself, that it's a political struggle by people who want to see a change. And then even if you put those things in place, making them work the way they are supposed to is a huge challenge. It's a tenacious struggle that takes, boldness, courage, but not individual courage, but a group that's within the university and outside of it. Professional organizations. I mean, the African Studies Association itself was very misogynistic. And the Women's Caucus of the association tried to kind of push the envelope and get the association to become more open to acknowledging the expertise of female African studies scholars, such that eventually people like Judith could become the president of the organization and other people who are women. So let's be clear, the academy is the American Political Science Association, which I'm supposed to be a member of, and I'm not, is also culpable. And people have done research that documents this. So don't let's kind of assume that just because we are well-intentioned, that all these things will just happen. We need to work, and that work is a long-term struggle.
Thank you, Prof. So we have two comments. One comment, I wonder how this would be taken. We have a handful of, we have men on the call, but we haven't really heard their voices. I'd be curious to hear. I wonder how what the response will be to this. Like, many women have spoken about this, but wonder what the perspective of any men on the call might be. Second of all, we have a comment from Professor Laiwala. Are you still here? Are you able to?
Yes, I'm here.
Excellent.
Yeah, I was going to say that since most of these atrocities actually happen within the campus, they happen in offices of lecturers, perhaps we have to think about how we can make those spaces safe. I went to the Pan-Atlantic University and I saw that the offices of the lecturers are actually open. You can actually see through, okay? And I know that in the US, you have this policy of having your doors open when you have your students in there. Perhaps this would be one way of protecting female students in particular when they go into the offices of lecturers. And I think that there's something that the university can think about. I've served on about 3 sexual harassment panels at the University of Lagos. I know that the University of Lagos takes this very seriously, because when a case comes out in the public, it drops off very badly on the integrity of the university, as well as the other male lecturers. It casts aspersion on them as well. There are a lot of lecturers in the university who are very decent. So the BBC video that came out was a horrible one, and there's no university that would like that kind of publicity. So I think that we must make our spaces really very safe for the students. We've had instances where we've had to speak with the students, particularly the females, during orientation to give them confidence, because once you take away that cloak of fear, then they become bolder. And I know that in the last session, Byfield talked about the control of their bodies, talking about bodily integrity and all of that. So once you empower the students to speak out, and also not just speaking out about sexual abuse, but also protecting them, particularly, to tell them about how to comport themselves. I mean, for example, is the student in a lecturer's house, in a married lecturer's house, cooking for him and ironing his clothes for him? That's calling for trouble. So we let them know that they could be susceptible to this kind of sexual harassment when they are not found in the right spaces. So I think that it is very important, some of the points that were raised about orientation of staff, male lecturers coming into the university, how they are supposed to comport themselves when they come in is very, very important. It's not just about what you're coming to teach, but how you comport yourself. These are points that are really very, very important. I think that we could adopt that policy of having the doors, the offices quite open, the architecture worked in such a way that people can actually see what's going on. And in the case of Baroa, I was also on that panel. Luckily, he's serving his term now. But the parents of the girl actually trusted him and took the child there very early in the morning. But he claimed that he was a lecturer in the university, although he was a part-time lecturer. But he had told them in the estate that he was so influential in giving admission. And then the father took her there very early. And then before the cleaners even came, he had used her in somebody else's office. So it's really horrible. The office spaces must be safe. That's my own contribution.
Thank you so much, Professor Laiwala. Sharon, I'm not so sure you had your hand up. Would you still like to make a comment or ask a question?
Yes, please. Thank you very much. This is a very, very interesting session. And I'm just wondering that there is a trend that we are not paying attention to. Recently, there's this trend of male lecturers coming out to say that even the female students also harass them. And they've been giving us all kinds of reasons that, okay, even if the offices are open and they are safe spaces, there are still instances where it's the girl who brings, or the lady who brings, brings up the proposal, and then harasses them in one way or the other, that nobody's saying anything about that. What do you think? Thank you.
Oh, also, you didn't introduce yourself.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Sharon Omotosho. I coordinate the Women's Research and Documentation Center at the Institute of African Studies, University of Ibadan.
Thank you so much.
Obviously that's a very spurious and basic kind of defense from someone who is clearly in the position of power and now wants to mount the defense that this junior person that they have more power over has so overtaken them, and that they are the victim, in fact. And everyone should, sympathize with them and listen to the story of how they were victimized by this person's youth, by this person's beauty, by this person's whatever. I think that argument, if that argument is coming from, from colleagues, from people who are in positions clearly in the higher position of power, and they're expecting the audience to buy it, it's an insult to the audience. That's what I think.
Can I say something?
Of course.
Yes. I mean, the fact that anybody would look other people in the eye and mount that kind of argument, it's proof positive about the culture of impunity. In fact, we should not entertain any such argument because it's so clear that these perpetrators are the ones in the position of power, and they are the ones that are going to be held accountable and should be held accountable. And so we shouldn't even in the first place entertain such a discussion. In fact, anybody who starts that, the consequences as a result of speaking like that should be piled on. There's no room for that kind of thinking. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Prof. Let's hear from two of our panelists, but first let's hear from someone we haven't heard from, Abiola Odejide. We'd like to respond, and then I'd let our panelists respond, please.
Okay, thank you very much. I was involved in preparing the gender policy and sexual harassment policy for the University of Ibadan. I'm retired now, but they keep calling me to intervene in some of these cases. First, I want to mention the question of the institutional will to follow up. We have a gender mainstreaming office, we have a panel, but sometimes the students are reluctant to come because of the fear of victimization. And then sometimes we get anonymous complaints, which we can't follow up because the university's policy says you can't follow up anonymous complaints. And then the question about the men who say students are victimizing them. I was on the University of Ibadan Community Forum for a search for a VC, and two of the people who want to become VCs actually made this point that female students harass them. And I couldn't be, one was even so, it was so graphic, and the way he said it. But the point is that if such things do happen, it's because the girls know that there's the possibility of using the possibility of getting extra marks and so on. But if there weren't that possibility, it wouldn't happen. One other thing we should pay attention to is some of these disciplines or professions that have a highly hierarchical structure, like medicine and law, and we've had issues with that. So that in the University of Ibadan now, in the College of Medicine, there's an initiative to start, talking about sexual harassment in that college and so on. The law people, I don't know what they're doing. So we need to even look at it in terms of disciplinary programs and so on.
Thank you so much for your comments, Prof. And so then we have two hands, one from Charmaine and the other from Professor Okome as well. Charmaine?
Okay, thank you. I wanted to say it's not just lecturers and even VCs that make a point of saying that female students are the ones who are harassing them. It's also male students, you know, who say that they are being harassed by female students and that the female students are harassing the lecturers. I think that what's happening when the lecturers say they're being harassed is they are probably referring to their experiences of discomfort with sexual arousal. But it's also indicative of a sense of them feeling entitled in the main to take advantage of whatever opportunities present themselves. So it's not so much it may not be so much an instance of the men making an argument about victimization, but a more complex one about how harassment is being understood by different people. Either way, it's clearly an abdication of responsibility. And this is where you're finding at so many different levels, whether it's male lecturers in their personal capacities, but also the structures of power within the institution, not recognizing that they have a certain institutional power that should not be abused. And that whatever the student is wearing, whether or not she made overtures or, you know, made a first move or not, there should be no transactions, there should certainly not be any abuse or violence. And that is something that the very fact that we have to spell it out just shows how corrupted the system and the institutions are in either their lack of understanding of power relations or their willfulness to exert power over any female or less authoritative person in whichever power hierarchy they find themselves.
Thank you, Charmaine. And so we have 5 more minutes. We have 3 comments. Professor Okome, could you please comment? We have a new hand from Akua Britwom, and we have Professor Byfield as well.
I defer to the participants.
The new hand. Okay, thank you, Professor Okome. Akua, can you respond, please? I'm sorry if I'm not saying your name properly. Are you there?
Hello.
Yes.
Yes, I'm there. Thank you very much for having me and following. Can you hear me, please?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Hello. Okay. Okay. So thank you very much for having me. I'm a queer veteran from the University of Cape Coast in Ghana, and it's been very informative for me following this and also just seeing what are similarities in terms of issues. I want to quickly address 2 issues. Males saying that female students harass them. What we have faced this, and sometimes it really has stalled our efforts at addressing these issues. What we have done is to say that this is sexual bribery and corruption, and it is as a result of the fact that we haven't been able to deal with sexual harassment. The students really are transient, and it is lecturers who are within the institutions. And so what lecturers should be concerned about is what kinds of messaging they are sending out to get students who are with us for just a short period to always believe that they can come to them with their bodies. And so what this means is that it's becoming systemic and we need to address this. Secondly, dealing with students also refusal to follow up when they have reported. We have seen that as soon as students make a complaint, they need feminist counselors who will carry them through the process because it can be really traumatic. It is invasive of their emotions.
Akua, we lost you. Okay, so if you're able to come back, we will definitely want to hear the second part of your comment. But in the interest of time, I'm just going to move to Professor Byfield. But so Aqua, when you come back, definitely. Or you can also put the rest of your comments in the chat. So Judy?
I'm going to keep this very short. One of the things that we haven't really talked about, but I think is a really important area in general, is popular culture. And that we need to have conversations about, you know, the sort of music, movies, all of these things that are being produced and how they contribute to some of this predatory behavior, so that culture of impunity that we see all around. And part of what that brought that to mind for me was the question from the doctor who was concerned about her teenage grandchildren, because popular culture is such an important medium through which young people are learning about these topics. The other piece, though, is that popular culture can also be a space for critique and for imagining different sorts of power relations, different sorts of gender relations. And so, you know, popular culture has been important in, you know, all of these different health campaigns and such. So I think both, you know, for those of us who may teach courses on popular culture, but also who are in theater, in art, that we take advantage of those spaces also to be part of this conversation. And I will stop there.
Thank you, Judy. So we're almost at time. We have one comment from Lucky, I see you, and then we'll end with Professor Okome's comment for today. Lucky, can you unmute or show yourself? Lucky, can you hear me? Oh.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, good evening. It's been a refreshing time listening to the conversation. I'm Lucky from Ibadan, a doctoral student at the Faculty of Department of English, and also a journalist working on Nigerian Tribune. I looked at many of the issues raised are not really far from what we experience. And I think I especially paid attention to Professor Oyewumi's issue about education and drawing attention to these things. I think that's one area everybody still needs to really come together to work on, involving us. So somebody mentioned that. But I know, for examples, it abounds, it's common. But I think one major thing also that lecturers will still be advised to do is that they are parents. Lecturers are parents, so the issue of lecturers being seduced or being harassed by their students should not even come in. We know there are instances like that. So I think that's where lecturer, it must be emphasized. The duty of a teacher is to stand in as parents. So I don't think I want to say much since our time is fast spent. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for your comment. So
Thank you.
We're at the end of time. I know that, so Prof. Okome, did you have something to say to sort of maybe take?
No, you know, not really much, except that everything, all the suggestions that have been made are wonderful. I just think that if we are serious, you know, each of us can identify organizations or groups that are working on these issues, and we should join them. When we join them, the work that we are going to do is a long-term, thankless job. I'll tell you what I have done in some instances. There was a lecturer in one of the Nigerian universities, very brilliant guy. So he asked me for a recommendation, but then I heard that he sexually harasses students. So I told him, I said, I can't recommend you because this is what I heard about you. Because, you know, in the first place, it's wrong. In the second place, it would be unethical for me to know this and then to recommend you for stuff, and then you go somewhere and victimize people. I told colleagues in that, university about this guy, and everybody was saying, well, I can't do anything because then I would be seen as messing up his upward mobility and whatever. So I think, on the individual level, we have stuff to do. In terms of and then we need groups that really follow up on these issues. If a person steps forward, who is behind them? If we can't stand up and be behind people, they will not step forward. If we are saying that we won't allow anonymity, then how are students going to be able to confidently come forward when they can be punished? And there are all these resource deficits that we have talked about. So all of us have work to do. If we say we are committed, let's put our actions where our mouths are and get to work. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Prof. We have come to the end of our second session in our group of sessions, but I think it's clear that we're not at the end of this conversation. In a way, we're really at the beginning of this process, especially as a group such as the LSA. I want to give a special thank you to all our panelists who have joined us for these past 2 days. Thank you specifically, individually, all of you, Dr. Bosde George, Lola Conde, Professor Okome, Professor Byfield, Charmaine, Dietine Zaid, Taibat Lawenson. I hope I've mentioned everybody. Thank you for sharing your time and your stories with us. We really appreciate that. And of course, a special I'm sorry, I didn't mention Professor Zaid. She's not here today, but she was on the first panel. I just want to say also a special thank you to everybody who attended, who participated, who was here. I hope that after we sort of decompress and think about all the things we've spoken about, we can already plan to move forward. I guess we'll be in touch. The videos will be available. And thank you to everybody who's come. I'm going to stop recording now, but I just want to say thank you, and we will be in touch. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for moderating. Good job.
Yeah, I need a nap now.
Thank you. Thank you, and thank you, LSA.
Yes.
So LSA, you tell us the follow-up later, right?
Yes, yes. I know this has been very challenging for everybody, but we're here and we're going to keep moving through this.
And Saeed Ekushel.
Yes, how could I? Thank you. Special
thank you so much,
Professor.
Yeah. The Honorable President, fearless leader.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Just want to be sure.
Bye, everyone. I'll end the video in 1 minute.
We didn't hear from Sahid, though.
Sahid, are you still here? Are you going to say one word? Oh, he's disappeared.
Yes, it would be useful.
Thank you, Prof. I'm sorry, I can't use everyone's titles unless they're in your name. So please, no one should be offended. It's not intentional. There's a lot of stuff going on. Okay, so I'm going to end now, and I look forward to the next panel. Bye.